The two things everyone knows about Old Number 7 are wrong. One is incomplete. One is legally incorrect. This is the most recognized whiskey on earth. Nobody knows what it actually is. The man who invented the taste inside this bottle has never had his face on a poster, a photograph, or a wall. Not one image of him is known to exist. He is the reason this whiskey tastes the way it tastes. And for 150 years, this bottle was poured as if he never existed. The name on the label was never the whole story. Why? Lynchburg, Tennessee, the 1850s. The still on the Call farm sits along Louse Creek in Lincoln County. The air around it smells of burning sugar maple wood. The man running the operation is not Dan Call. Call is the owner. He is also a preacher, a grocer, and a farmer. He receives credit in the story told for most of the following century. But the man whose hands are on the process, the one whose skill has made this particular still the most respected operation in the county, is Nathan Green. Nathan is the name given to him while enslaved. Nearest is the name he will take when he becomes free. He is not owned by a person. He is owned by a commercial entity called Landis and Green. His enslavers rent him out to farms and plantations across Lincoln County because his distilling ability generates money. Nearest Green is a contractor in the most inverted meaning of that word. He was born around 1820, probably in Maryland. By the 1850s, his reputation has traveled far enough through Lincoln County that a runaway boy is sent to the Call farm specifically to learn from him. That boy is Jasper Newton Daniel. He arrived having left home at age 7 shortly after his mother died and his father remarried. He found work as a chore boy, feeding pigs and keeping the property. He was small, he was alone, and he had nowhere else to go. Then he was introduced to Nearest Green. The first thing Jack Daniel would have noticed was not a technique, it was a result. What came out of Nearest Green's still had something missing. Not the flavor, not the warmth. What was missing was the bite. The sharp edge that raw distilled spirit carries from the still. Gone. Not reduced. Gone. Nearest Green was producing something no one else in Lincoln County was producing, and he had been doing it for years before any boy arrived to learn from him. What Nearest teaches Jack is called sugar maple charcoal filtering. Freshly distilled whiskey, before it ever touches a barrel, is poured through 10 feet of charcoal made from burning sugar maple wood. The charcoal removes heavier compounds through adsorption, a process where molecules bond to the surface of the charcoal and stay there. The whiskey that comes out the other side is smoother, cleaner, and different in a way that does not require explanation. You taste it once and you know. Every bottle of Old Number 7 ever made has gone through this process. This step, performed before the whiskey ever sees a barrel, is the defining action. Not the corn in the mash, not the oak in the barrel. This. People would spend the next 170 years picking up this bottle and calling it smooth. They were describing a process whose inventor had been removed from the story. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains much of what comes after. Where the technique came from is a question without a clean answer. The Nearest Green Foundation, which has conducted extensive primary research into Green's history, states that many whiskey and food historians now believe the practice arrived in America from West Africa. Enslaved people had used charcoal to purify water and preserve food, techniques carried across the Atlantic during the slave trade. If that connection holds, the process that defines Old Number 7 did not originate in Tennessee. The taste that made this bottle famous traveled a very long way before it reached Louse Creek. Dan Call is quoted in a 1967 biography of the Jack Daniel brand as saying, "Uncle Nearest is the best whiskey maker that I know of." His own words, in print, naming the man that the company's tour guides would spend most of the following century not naming. No photograph of Nearest Green is known to exist. Not one image has been found in any archive church record, or family collection. The one photograph we have from the early distillery years shows Jack Daniel in the center row, white hat, black vest. Seated to his right is George Green, nearest son. The man who defined the taste of Old No. 7 left no visual trace. 1863. A temperance preacher known locally as Lady Love arrives at the Call farm and tells Dan Call that a man of God has no business running a still. Call sells the operation to Jack. Jack is approximately 13 years old. He sets up 5 miles down the road from the Call farm at a hollow he has found in the hills. He hires Nearest Green. In 1866, the federal government begins registering distilleries for taxation. Jack Daniels registers as Distillery No. 7 in District 4 of Tennessee. The brand records this as the first federal distillery registration in the United States. In 1884, Jack pays $2,148 for Cave Spring Hollow. The spring there runs at a constant 56 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, and the water comes out of the limestone bedrock free of iron. Iron turns whiskey dark and changes its character. The water from this spring is in every bottle of Old No. 7 made since 1884. It is still in the bottle today. In 1895, Jack switches to the square bottle, his stated reason, a square bottle for a square shooter. By this point, Old No. 7 is taking the form it will hold for the next century. The mash bill is 80% corn, 8% rye, and 12% malted barley. The new make spirit goes through Nearest Green's charcoal process before it ever touches a barrel. Then it goes into a new charred oak barrel and sits for 4 to 5 years. What comes out is not the most complex whiskey ever made, not the rarest, not the strongest. What it is consistent. The same experience, every bottle, every country, every pour. That is harder to achieve than it sounds. And it is what allowed Old No. 7 to become the reference point for American whiskey across the world. The whiskey community has always called it a starter bottle, the first whiskey people drink before they start taking whiskey seriously. What that judgment misses is that a bottle capable of introducing 100 million people to American whiskey without alienating a single one of them is not a simple achievement. It is a precisely calibrated one. It is Nearest Green's process in its most successful commercial form. In 1904, Jack travels by train to St. Louis without telling anyone in Lynchburg where he is going. The World's Fair is underway. Between a Ferris wheel demonstration, an appearance by Helen Keller, and the American debut of the hot dog, a distiller from a town nobody outside Tennessee has heard of enters his square bottles into an international competition alongside 24 entries from established European distilleries. He wins the gold medal for world's best whiskey. He comes home 4 days later and does not announce it. He is approximately 5 feet and 2 inches tall. The famous hat is not vanity. It is a short man making himself visible in a room. The Old No. 7 designation comes from that 1866 government registration. Then the government redrew its district lines. The distillery was reassigned as No. 16 in District 5. Jack kept using 7 because the label was already built around it. The most recognized number in whiskey sits on this bottle because of an administrative reassignment the distillery chose to ignore. There are other theories. The 7th recipe, 7 lost barrels, misrouted to the 1904 World's Fair, 7 girlfriends. The brand has printed the admission on his own materials. No one knows for certain. Ask anyone whether Old No. 7 is bourbon. They will say no. Tennessee whiskey. Different category. Old No. 7 is made from an 80% corn mash bill, aged in new charred oak barrels, distilled and barreled at the legally required proofs. It meets every federal requirement to be classified as straight bourbon. Brown-Forman's master distiller, Chris Fletcher, has said it directly. Tennessee whiskey is bourbon, but not all bourbon is Tennessee whiskey. Under the original NAFTA trade agreement, Old No. 7 is classified as straight bourbon for export. The brand refuses the word bourbon on the label because the Lincoln County process is the entire identity. The most recognized whiskey in the world is technically bourbon. It will never say so. For most of the 20th century, the official Jack Daniel's Distillery Tour told 275,000 annual visitors the same version of the origin story. Young Jack came to work for Dan Call. The preacher recognized his gift. The preacher taught him the craft. The rest was history. Jack Daniel himself never told that story. He hired Nearest Green the day he opened his distillery, kept him on for years, and acknowledged him as the man who had taught him. The simplified version came later, built by a brand that needed a cleaner origin story than the truth provided. Dan Call's 1967 biography quoted him calling Nearest Green the best whiskey maker he had ever known. That line was in print. The tour guides left it out. George Green, Nearest's son, is the man seated to Jack Daniel's right in the only known photograph from those early years. He worked the distillery floor alongside the man who had inherited his father's craft. His brothers Eddie and Eli worked beside him. Their children came after them. Their children's children came after those. 7 generations of Nearest Green's family worked at the Jack Daniel's distillery on the same land with the same equipment, running the same process their ancestor had built. The name absent from the official tour was the name of the man whose family had not left. The cleaner story was easier to sell. A white boy, a preacher, a Tennessee Spring, a square bottle. Nearest Green complicated that story. He made the brand more truthful but less simple. For most of the 20th century, the company chose the simple version. The history was not lost. The Green family knew it. The Lynchburg community knew it. The official version was just different from the true one. This bottle poured that simpler story into 170 countries for 150 years, 1910. Tennessee passes a statewide prohibition law. The still goes cold. Jack Daniel, whose health has been declining since at least 1907, has already handed the distillery to his nephew Lemuel Motlow and a cousin named Dick Daniel. He dies on October 9, 1911, from blood poisoning. The story told on the official tour is that he kicked his office safe one morning after forgetting the combination, broke a toe, and the infection spread over 6 years until it killed him. His own biographer has questioned whether this account is fully accurate. The blood poisoning is documented. The safe is legend. Lem Motlow challenges the Tennessee prohibition law in the state Supreme Court. He loses. He moves distilling to St. Louis, then Birmingham. Both fail. Whiskey made outside Lynchburg, away from the cave spring water, is never good enough to sell. In 1920, national prohibition arrives. Lem sells the distillery to George Remus, a Cincinnati attorney who operates more than a dozen distilleries under medicinal use permits while diverting the product to bootleggers. He would later kill his wife and be found not guilty by reason of insanity at a nationally followed trial. He holds the rights to Old No. 7 for the duration. Lem Motlow becomes a mule trader. The barn he built for that business still stands on the road to Tullahoma, a monument to the years when Old No. 7 survived without producing a drop. For 28 years, not a single new bottle of Old No. 7 is made. Lem runs for the Tennessee State Senate. He wins. He personally works to repeal the state's prohibition laws. The distillery reopens in 1938. It closes again in 1942 when wartime restrictions required distilleries to use inferior grain. Lem refuses to make inferior whiskey. He waits until 1947 when the restriction lifts. He dies the same year production resumes. His name is on the bottom of every bottle of Old No. 7 made today. Proprietor. One footnote worth keeping. According to the Motlow family genealogy, Lem Motlow had a distant cousin through shared great-great-grandparents named Asa Griggs Candler. The man who kept Old No. 7 alive by trading mules during Prohibition and the founder of Coca-Cola were related. Moore County, where the distillery stands, remains a dry county to this day. You cannot legally buy a bottle of Old No. 7 in the town where it is made. Workers who distill it every day have to drive to the next county to purchase a bottle with their employer's name on the label. The most recognized whiskey on earth has been living under a version of Prohibition since before national prohibition existed. By 1955, this bottle had survived 2 prohibitions, 1 world war, and a mule auction. What it had not done was become famous. Humphrey Bogart introduces Frank Sinatra to Old Number 7 in 1947 at gatherings in Bogart's Los Angeles home, where the original Rat Pack begins to form. 8 years of private preference, then Las Vegas. It is 1955. A bottle sits on a silver tray at the base of Frank Sinatra's microphone stand. He picks up his glass, turns to the crowd, and says 7 words. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jack Daniels. By morning, every bottle of Old Number 7 in the country is sold out. 3 ice cubes, 2 fingers of whiskey, a splash of water." Sinatra's method from the beginning, unchanged for the rest of his life. A bottle of Old Number 7 sits on a silver tray at the base of his microphone stand at every concert in every city for the rest of his performing career. He pours from it between songs. He holds it up to audiences in Las Vegas and New York and London. He calls it the nectar of the gods. Sinatra was not choosing the rarest whiskey in the room. He was choosing the most legible one. The bottle that Nearest Green had calibrated for smoothness over complexity was exactly the right object for a stage, a label readable from any seat, a taste with no sharp edge to explain, a bottle that worked the same in every country without translation. He chose the most consistently calibrated whiskey on earth and put it where the whole room could see it. He is never on the payroll. The distillery sends him free cases. He also carries a sponsorship contract with Chivas Regal in the later years of his career. Sinatra drinks what he wants. He also takes money when offered. Both things coexist. When he dies in May 1998, his family places a bottle of Old Number 7 in his casket alongside cherry-flavored Lifesavers, Tootsie Rolls, a pack of Camel cigarettes, and a Zippo lighter. The bottle that sat on his stage for 4 decades goes underground with him. He preferred the original 90 proof version. In 1987, the brand lowered Old Number 7 from 90 to 80 proof. Sinatra had 11 more years to notice the difference. What follows Sinatra is less a strategy and more a kind of gravity. Rock and roll finds the bottle because it is already the language of a certain kind of stage. Keith Richards carried it into the mythology of touring. Lemmy Kilmister drank a mixture of Old Number 7 and Coca-Cola so habitually that Motorhead's backstage became synonymous with it. A bottle a day until the end of his life. The Black Label appeared in stage riders and tour photographs through the 1970s, the 1980s, and the 1990s. Each generation passed it to the next as shorthand for a specific register. American, unpolished enough to be honest, smooth enough to drink fast. The same bottle that began on Louse Creek, in the hands of an enslaved distiller, ended up on stages from London to Tokyo. 2016, Fawn Weaver is traveling abroad with her husband when she sees the front page of the New York Times International Edition. The headline describes Jack Daniels' hidden ingredient as help from a slave. Weaver has never drunk Jack Daniels. She does not know who Nearest Green is. Over the following year, she interviews Nearest Green's descendants. She traces church and courthouse records across Lincoln and Moore counties. She follows oral histories the Lynchburg community had maintained quietly for decades, while the official tour told a different story. The Green family had never stopped knowing. The history was not buried by time. It was set aside by a brand and kept alive by the people who worked alongside it. Clay Risen's New York Times article had named the story publicly for the first time at scale. Weaver set out to prove it and then to build something from the proof. In August 2017, Brown-Forman officially names Nathan Nearest Green as the Jack Daniel's Distillery's first master distiller on the 150th anniversary of the brand's founding. His name goes onto the company website. In October 2017, his story is added to the official guided tour for the first time. The same tour that for most of a century told 275,000 visitors a year the Dan Call story. Victoria Edie Butler, Nearest Green's great-great-granddaughter and a former Jack Daniels employee, said it plainly: there would never have been Jack Daniels made without a Green on the property. 7 generations of his family worked at the distillery. No photograph of Nearest Green has ever been found. Weaver converts a 458-acre horse farm in Shelbyville, Tennessee, into the Nearest Green Distillery and launches Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey. Within a few years, it becomes the second best-selling Tennessee whiskey in the United States behind only Old Number 7. The most recognized whiskey on earth, also the most misread. People thought they were drinking Jack Daniels. What they were tasting was Nearest Green's process. The name on the label was never the whole story. Nobody put Nearest Green's name on the bottle until 2017. The process he built has been in every bottle since 1866. If you have ever poured a glass of Old Number 7, you have already had the closest thing to his signature that exists. Present everywhere, explained nowhere, until now. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There are a lot of bottles with this much history inside them.